Hi everyone, I'm Nikki Wallace. I'm CSO and I have the great pleasure to be joined by Katie McFarlane, one of our non-executive directors. Thanks, Katie, for joining us on Neural Threads today.
Thank you, Nikki. I'm very excited to be here.
Fantastic. So I'm just going to go through some questions. It'd be great to just understand a bit more about your background and your motivation to join the company. So let's start with the journey. So as a scientist, I think it's my duty to ask you, what flavor scientist are you? What was your PhD in?
So I actually have what's called a PharmD, which is a
Okay.
degree that is probably not that well known in Australia. So um, it's technically a Doctor of Pharmacy degree. It's a professional degree. And so I liken it for people. I went to school the same amount of time as somebody who has a veterinary degree. It's like getting a DBM, but for drugs.
Okay.
So that is the course of study. So basically, I had a bachelor's in pharmacy and then went on to do a much more practice-based clinical experience to get my doctor of pharmacy. And that's where I did do some research and published and whatnot. And then I did a postdoc then. And so I did all of that work at Purdue University, which is a school in the Midwest of the United States, so out in Indiana in the middle of the cornfields. And then when I sort of made the decision to pursue a career in the pharmaceutical industry, I did a postdoc through Rutgers University, which was in New Jersey, and that's when I was at Hoffman La Roche. So I did 2 years of basically clinical research and development. I got to work on a phase 1 drug. I was there the first time it went into man. It was very exciting. And so I was out, writing protocols and monitoring studies and really getting what I thought was a very good grassroots understanding of how clinical trials work. And so I did that for 2 years. And then it was after that that I sort of started my career. So I started out in research and development with Park Davis, doing cardiovascular trials.
That's a big background. When I hear things like that, it's really humbling. I'll make sure I won't start talking about any pharmacy questions because it'll be way over my head, Katie.
Oh, no, no, not really.
Yeah, no, it will be. I am a biologist through and through. So, in terms of that transition to get from, doing the sort of the more academic background, it sounds like you had that experience early on in your career, though. So you kind of it was an easier, smoother transition than most of us have, right? It
I
sounds
think
like.
it was, I would say there were a couple things. So look, when I was a very little girl, gosh, it must have been, I was certainly only maybe 6 or 7 years old. We went through sort of a bad patch in my family where both of my brothers became very critically ill. My older brother was discovered to have a heart ailment, and he spent a lot of time in the hospital. Luckily, they were able to fix it, and he is alive and well today. But this was in the 1960s. It was a long, and sort of new thing. And then my little brother had meningitis, and that left him with epilepsy and almost
Mm.
completely deaf. And he went through multiple surgeries and hospitalizations and things. So as a kid, I was exposed to all the things my brothers were going through. And I think just really early on, I decided that I was interested in healthcare in general and that I wanted to help people. And I think if you talk to almost anybody who's in a health profession, whether they're a nurse or a physician, a scientist, or a pharmacist like me, they'll tell you they went into it because they wanted to help people. That's the most
Yeah.
common, denominator. And so, I was doing that and I worked in a hospital. And when I was doing my postdoc, I worked in a retail pharmacy in a grocery store, believe it or not. And I had people coming in because I worked at night and on the weekends to make extra money. And these patients would come in and 9 times out of 10, they were so confused. And it was so hard for them to understand why they were taking their medicines, to remember to take. There were so many aspects of it. And I always had this feeling of, my gosh, we could do better. And not only could we do better, developing better medicines, but helping people use them properly, helping clinicians understand how to prescribe them. And I think that was the big draw for me to kind of say, you know what, maybe I'm going to be better off trying to help lots of people on a bigger scale not as one-to-one personally, maybe, but it felt more impactful to me to be able to try and do things on a larger scale. And that's really what drew me to the industry.
This might be an unfair question. Of all the experiences you've had, maybe you haven't had it yet. Maybe it's with this next company that you've
Yeah.
recently joined. Do you have a career highlight? Like what aspect or one role perhaps that you can reflect on?
Yeah. So I think, prior to, joining this board, probably one of the big highlights of my career and the thing I'm sort of best known for, to be honest, is I was the very first product manager on what eventually became Lipitor. So I was at Park Davis and I had worked in cardiovascular in research and development. So I was working doing mostly phase 4 clinical trials, things to help us with competitive advantages and things. And I was working with antihypertensive, heart failure, and a product for lipid lowering called Lopid. And at the time, Lipitor was a number. It was, I think, CI 981, if I remember correctly. And I had made the move over into marketing already. And I think, kind of unbeknownst to me, I think there were some forces at work behind the scenes. And I think the team, the clinical team that was developing Lipitor, really wanted, they frankly were afraid the marketing people were going to screw it up. And so, because it was not as easy as everybody thinks, by the way, we were on track to be the sixth statin to come into the market.
Oh.
People don't realize that. It was not forecast to do well. And so the head of the research team sort of was nudging the president to say, hey, we need somebody who's got a scientific background on this drug, who could really understand it. And so those forces kind of pushed me, at a really an early point in my career into a really great place. And so I was part of the launch team 3 years before launch, getting everything prepared, and then on through the launch of Lipitor. So there were a lot of things that happened during that launch that were kind of different and groundbreaking and really exciting. And so that was definitely a high point for me, for sure. But I've been very lucky to do lots of product launches after that. Every product launch is exciting. There's so much that goes into it, as you know, and so many years. My favorite thing at any launch meeting is getting the scientists there and having them talk to the sales force about why they think the product is special, what makes it different. I think they're often surprised how much the sales representatives want to hear from them and want to hear from the people that actually worked on the drug from the beginning. And just to see them see their baby get born, see the thing come to light is probably one of my favorite things about being in the industry.
Not yet had that experience, but it just sounds incredible. It just, yeah,
Yes,
that's, I suppose it's what,
hopefully,
yeah.
hopefully we'll get there with MPL, right? Yes.
Yeah. So, it's really interesting thinking about your mentioning in that product management role. Did you have any formal marketing or business experience, or how did that come about?
Yeah, it was funny. I was an experiment. I will
Okay.
absolutely admit to this. So I did not have any formal marketing training. I didn't actually take any business classes in college. But when I was working in R&D at Park Davis, working in the phase 4 group, we worked pretty closely or interacted quite a lot with the marketing teams, because the marketing teams would come to us and say, look, we're getting hammered on this point by our competitors, or, how can we answer this question? And I was pretty junior at the time. And so I was just young and exuberant enough to spend lots of time digging through lots of data that I think most people didn't have the energy or interest in doing. And so I would haul out the NDA and go through it and go through all the different studies and say, why can't we, use this data or pick this out? And it was a huge help to our marketing team. And so they recognized that. And so they started kind of using me to help them, bring things to the advertising agency. I got involved in sales training. I got involved. Park Davis was a small company, so kind of a mid-sized company at the time.
Mm.
We became a very big company because of Lipitor, but at the time we weren't that big, and so you could wear a lot of hats. And I was always ready to volunteer and do whatever they needed. So it was just a rare opportunity. And then when the company went through a big reorg in 1994, there was an opportunity in product management. And actually, a very nice Australian gentleman named John Montgomery, who was our VP of marketing, I went to him and said, look, I'm interested in getting into marketing. Why don't you send me out into a sales role for a while? You know, I don't want to be there forever, but I'd like to get that experience. And he said, well, funny, you should come talk to me. We've been thinking about bringing you over as a product manager now. So it was very serendipitous. And I worked on a product called Acupril or Quinapril, which was an antihypertensive, it was an ACE inhibitor. And I worked on that product for a couple of years. And then the opportunity came around to go onto the Lipitor team. So yeah, it was really lucky for me. And funny now, and it's not just because of me. There's, this has happened industry wide. I think there's been a big movement to bringing people into marketing from not just pure business and sales roles and things. And they're much more often bringing people in from, people from supply chain, people from accounting, finance, people from the science background, the scientific area. And look, I think, if you think about it, right? I had the rare opportunity as a pharmacist, and I always tell this to the pharmacists I deal with. They're the one person that's usually right at the point of contact when the patient's actually getting the product, and the physician doesn't see that, nobody else sees that. And by the way, when they get all confused or they have a side effect or something goes wrong, the pharmacist hears about it a lot. And so having been in that role and having interacted with physicians when patients were having trouble, I think it just gave me a different viewpoint. I think in some cases it made me more effective. Now I had a lot of learning to do, right? And so I was very lucky to have good mentors throughout my career and the opportunity to go and take courses and learn the business side as I was going. But I would say it definitely was more learning on the job than you would guess in a lot of cases.
That's fantastic to hear that background. I can't imagine. I mean, you said there's more of a shift towards that now, but I can't imagine there's many professionals with that fantastic, exquisite detail, that knowledge of the pharmacy and having the marketing. Like, what an awesome combo on our side. It's fantastic. We're very lucky to have you. So in terms of how we ended up with having you on the board, can you tell us a bit about your introduction to the company and what drew you to the role? What was your motivation?
Sure. So I first met the CEO, Michael Thurn, a number of years ago when he was working on a different startup, and it was in a different therapeutic area. It was actually in the dermatology space. And he, through a recommendation from an investment bank, hired my firm, my consulting firm, which is a very small boutique firm. And so it was really me and a couple of my staffers hired us to do some work. And so that's how I got to know Michael. And so he's always been really good about just keeping in touch. He's a good networker. So I would hear from him from time to time. And so about a year ago now, I heard from Michael, and he talked a little bit about what was happening at the company with Monopantal. And full disclosure, I did a small project for him at that time. And then after that was all wrapped up, which was sort of at the end of the year, he had mentioned to me that they might be looking to bring some other people onto the board because I do serve on another ASX listed board for Maine Pharma. I think that was a little bit of a help because I know some of the rules of the road of the ASX, even though I'm here in the United States and have mostly worked for, on the US side. So yeah, I heard back, from Michael, and obviously I was very excited about the work going on and this focus on neurodegenerative diseases and motor neuron diseases. I think it's really one of probably the toughest horizon the industry has faced. When you look at success, right? I've worked in other therapeutic areas like cardiovascular disease where we've made amazing inroads, right? We have data where we can prevent heart attacks and death, and we can prolong people's lives and improve their quality of life. I've worked, in contraception, which obviously, very utilitarian types of products, menopause, things like that. But all the areas I've worked on in the neurodegenerative space, and I've worked with companies, mostly in a consulting role on Parkinson's and ALS and Alzheimer's disease. And look, the sad fact is there's been a lot of failures.
Mm.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
And so the chance to be part of something where we could make an inroad here and have something that really is going to make a difference for people, I didn't think twice. Obviously getting to know the rest of the board, and Sergio is a fabulous chair, and I just thought the chemistry was really great. And so I had no hesitations whatsoever about joining the board. I was really pleased and flattered to be invited.
Well, we're equally pleased. So just to touch a bit more perhaps on the challenges you just started to mention there, what are some of the unique challenges you can possibly see with us development treatments in that space?
Sure. So I think, so ALS, which is sort of our lead program, right? I think those challenges are inherent, right? It's a very quickly progressive disease. So, having a treatment that makes a measurable difference on a disease that is progressing so rapidly, very
Yeah.
difficult. I think the science itself is still evolving quite a lot. You know that way better than I do. So this is your territory. So I think it's very complicated. We still have a lot of unknowns.
Mm,
Whenever we're dealing with the brain, it's not like we can just run around and biopsy everybody's brains
exactly.
and learn what we need to know. So it's really hard. And I think, so I think that's a big challenge. I think also, like you look at a disease like Alzheimer's, and I think what we're learning with Alzheimer's is, there have been many, many treatments looking at amyloid beta,
Mm,
right? And everybody thought that was going to be the mother lode of the target. And it's been helpful, but I don't think anybody would say, oh yes, we've cracked it.
yeah.
And we probably need to go earlier and earlier, which means we need
Mm,
to figure out how do we identify who's at risk, which is the same problem with ALS, right?
mhm. Yeah.
We don't know who's going to develop ALS. So these things are problematic. And I think the other thing, and I think this applies across the board with these neurodegenerative diseases, they don't get as much research funding as things like cancer, or some of the other diseases we deal with. I remember looking a ways back at Alzheimer's in particular, and it's the money that is put into Alzheimer's R&D is a tiny fraction of what goes into cancer. Because, with cancer, we have survivors and we have children, and people can hold people up and it gets people excited. And so there's a lot of private money and a lot of impetus that comes into it. Sadly, people with neurodegenerative diseases, particularly in the late stages, it's so debilitating. They're not out in the public eye, and it's it's a really hard platform
Yeah.
to work from. So we have to have a way to get investors excited about the potential, and to get the public excited, that there really are things on the horizon that have promise and that are worth investing in. So I think that's one of the challenges for every company in the space,
Yeah.
is to how to get investors excited about it.
On the flip side, what do you think might be some of the opportunities for a company like ours in the neurodegenerative space?
I think probably one of the biggest advantages you have is being a small company and being very agile, able to make decisions quickly. The one thing is you don't have sort of this established core of staff scientists that have their own biases, right?
Mhm.
So you go out and cherry pick and work with the top clinicians, the top scientists, and bring them in as needed as consultants.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge advantage,
Okay.
with a smaller biotech, biopharma, like this, and you're not bogged down in your own processes. I think look, a lot of people would say that, some of the huge multinational pharma companies, by their own admission, they've gotten very slow at doing things. And with these neurodegenerative diseases where, time is people, time is quality of life, time is all
Mhm.
those things, you know, having processes that bog the process down and make things go slower is never a good thing with these types of diseases. So I think that is definitely an advantage. I think the other thing, and I don't think anybody at the FDA would ever admit to this at all, but in my experience, having worked with lots of different companies as a consultant, um, I sense that the FDA is more cooperative and more collaborative with small companies, and particularly in a case like ours where you've got the orphan drug designation. So really, the FDA has a mandate to collaborate and
Mhm.
help to ease the path and help make the get this treatment to market. Right now, it's got to be safe and effective, no doubt, and that's the case. But I get the sense and the feeling of my experience is they're a little bit more collaborative, a little bit more open. Part of it is that, look, if every person from the scientific staff of our company went to sit at an FDA meeting, it's going to be a small number of people. Whereas a big
Yeah.
pharma might walk in with 20 people, and the FDA just hates that. So it
Okay.
doesn't set up a good collaborative. It
Yeah.
gets,
Yeah.
it feels more confrontational. So I think that actually can be used to the advantage, very much to the advantage of the company
Okay.
in developing that relationship.
Well, that leads on to the next question. I was just wondering, obviously we've got this, we're a little island far away from the USA, and
Yes,
knowing that we need to bridge that gap and how we're going to try to crack into the US market.
yeah,
You possibly see that as a strength, being the small size means that we potentially
yeah.
can have a better relationship with the FDA as well. Can you think of anything else that might help give us even a bigger competitive edge in terms of trying to, as an Aussie biotech trying to crack into the US market?
Yeah. So look, I mean, and I think I mentioned this on a board meeting one day. Look, I think you can kind of use your Aussiness as a strength, right?
Okay.
I will say that Americans in general, we kind of love Australians, and everyone's a bit
Yeah.
fascinated with Australia. It is the other side of the world. Australians have a certain reputation here as being pretty fun loving and pretty open and kind-hearted people, and so I think there will be a curiosity there.
Okay.
Um, look, ultimately, it's about the data, right? It's about the drug
Mm.
and it's about the data. And if indeed this treatment pans out to do what we hope it can do, you're going to have people knocking at your door and begging to get on board, right?
Mm.
Because people want to be part of something big like this, and something that can be a success.
Yeah.
So, I think what you're doing, with the Healy platform, which is definitely a way to totally accelerate yourself into the US market and put yourself into the consciousness of everyone that works in the ALS space in the US, that's a huge step, right? Because now everybody's going to know who you are and
Mhm.
what the treatment is. But now the treatment has to do its work, right? It has to be effective, and that'll
Yeah.
be the case with any therapeutic area we pursue with this technology. So I always say the data speaks. You have lots of small companies that nobody knows who they are, but they turn up, with an effective treatment, and now everybody knows. I mean, think of BioNTech with the COVID vaccine, right? I don't
Mm.
think that was a top of mind name here in the United States, and now everybody knows who they are. So yeah, so
Yeah.
I think it does come down to the product ultimately.
So yeah, you touched on the Healy platform. So obviously, my background is in ALS research. I was acutely aware of the importance and the significance of being accepted on as a platform on the platform trial. But I feel like maybe in the US it has even more emphasis and sort of, I suppose, clout than it does for Australia. Do you think the Americans recognize it more than we do, perhaps?
Um, Certainly the Americans that are in the space, right? If anyone that's familiar with the neurodegenerative, research and development area, I think it carries a lot of weight. Look, Healy, it's coming out of Mass General, which is one of the top institutions in the United States. I mean, it's for, not just for research either, but also for care. So it's a very well respected institution. Folks know that, the very top researchers and scientists and clinicians work there. And so that in and of itself gives you, sort of a check mark on the credibility box that they've taken your treatment into their platform trial. Because look, they want they're human too. They want to help people. They want to have successful treatments. So what they've seen so far is enough to make them interested in going further and taking this molecule further. That we couldn't have a better setting for that. I also think, and it'll be interesting for sort of investors and people coming in that are not that familiar with the neurodegenerative disease space, just the fact that this platform trial exists as a mechanism for taking a drug through a path to approval. It's a proven path. It's, the infrastructure is there. You don't have to build the infrastructure. You don't have to re-identify investigators. And that is something, it's very unique, really. Obviously, it exists with some of the cancer trial networks. But in other therapeutic areas, that doesn't exist. So again, for a smaller company coming from outside the US, like this is probably the Healy platform is the best way to launch yourself, into the US market in a very quick and efficient way. So I just think it's great that you've been accepted there. So terrific.
So you've obviously walked us through your extensive background and experience today in the US market. Can you perhaps talk a bit more about what strategic advantages you can believe you can bring to an Aussie biotech like ours?
Yes. So I think probably whenever I'm dealing with companies, particularly biotech companies that are outside the US, we have sort of this big black box in the US, which is our healthcare system. Which is confusing when you come from a healthcare system where the government is the main payer and is making all the decisions. Now, make no mistake, the government is an enormous payer here in the United States too. But even with our government payment, we have many different levels and types of payment, and it's not as straightforward as what you have in other systems. So I think something that I can bring to the table is a pretty deep understanding of the healthcare system here in the United States, and more particularly the things that we need to do early in development right now to be getting this product in a place where it will be accepted and it will be reimbursed, and where we can price it appropriately so that patients will have access to the drug, and that we can support patients across all schemes, whether you're on private insurance or government insurance. So all of those things, I think my understanding of how that works, the supply chain, what it costs to commercialize a product here in the United States, what the real investment is, and the pieces of that have to happen. That's something I think I really can bring to the table for the company. And I think it's a large part of why they asked me to join the board.
I would also think, though, your connections and your network must be so vast, given your experiences. And so I imagine, do you think that's an important aspect of this as well, is how well connected we are? How do we grow our network? I imagine that's a really important part of your role as well.
Definitely. So I think part of it is, I obviously have a lot of connections within big and small pharmaceutical companies here in the US. I think, wow, we can't say what will happen ultimately, right? Whether our company will take this thing the whole way, or is, I think it's inevitable that people will come knocking on our door. And I do have, a lot of contacts within these other companies, whether they're in these therapeutic areas or in business development. A funny thing, part of my background when I was at Park Davis, I was there for 10 years, and, the company grew wildly during those 10 years. due to a lot of factors. And then we were acquired by Pfizer. And at that acquisition, many, many, many people, including myself, eventually left the company and went on to different ventures and things like that. And as a result, there are sort of this alumni network of Warner Lambert people throughout the industry. And so almost any time I encounter a company, there's somebody there that I know from my past. So it's either people that I've worked with, through my consulting work or through, this past. And, I've dealt with some companies that are like, man, you Park Davis people, you're all over the place, So yeah, they're definitely spread far and wide. And so that helps. It does help to have those contacts.
Absolutely. So on the other side of that, though, just say for some listeners who might be less familiar with the importance of the US market, can you help them and help us understand why that global perspective is so important for a biotech like
Yeah.
ours?
Yeah. So in general, not obviously we have a big population here in the US, but not the biggest in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But far and away, most biotechs are valued based on the potential of their product in the US market. And it's generally because we are the most lucrative market. So in spite of the fact that you hear a lot of things about people not being able to get their medicine here in the US, we do a pretty good job of people being able to get access when you approach it right. And the US is able to withstand the pricing that is needed to get a lot of these drugs developed, right? So you'll hear some Americans say that, boy, we're kind of subsidizing the rest of the world with what we're paying for drugs here in the United States. And that may be partially true, but we are able to withstand as an economy probably the best pricing in the world on pharmaceutical products here. And a lot of that is what pays for the research and development. Investors usually make their decision on putting a big investment into a product. If they're running models, they're running those based on the sales in the US, the potential in the US. So it is a very lucrative market in general. And it does set the tone for the rest of the world. Now, look, that's not to say that like the EU is a substantial market, probably in volume, it's about the same as the US. And then, of course, you've got, Asia and the rest of the world, which are, massive. But a lot of times the US is sort of the front runner on these things, and the other countries follow. So if we can be successful in the US, odds are we'll be successful everywhere else. And I think that's what it comes down to is the importance of doing this right so we can be successful in the US.
Mm-mm. Think of the Frank Sinatra song when you say that, but except our place in New York with with the US
Yeah, I
instead. We
know.
can make it there, we can make it anywhere, right?
Right. It does make everybody roll their eyes a little bit, but
Yeah.
it's kind of true. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. So I don't know if this is another big picture question. Are there any trends across biotech in general, or opportunities in the biotech industry that an Aussie company like ours should be particularly aware of that you wanted to maybe address with us?
Um, I think in terms of, so look, the trend that I've been talking about, and you'll hear people say over and over again, it's all about access, right? And I think even here in the US now, obviously, if you're watching politics and you're watching anything that is happening, there's a huge push towards bringing down the cost of drugs for people in the US, and just sort of even things out around the world. And I don't think it's ever going to get to being a flat price worldwide. But we are seeing some bargaining being done. Laws have been passed now in the U.S. Allowing for select drugs the government to negotiate prices, which they weren't allowed to do before. And so I would say at this point, it's just the tip of the iceberg, and there's a select number of very high priced medications. Whether these areas that we're looking at, like ALS, I don't think it would be subject to that at this point in time. It's just too critical of a disease. And certainly for early drugs that get in, you're not talking about an area where you've got 7 or 8 effective treatments for psoriasis, for example, that are monoclonal antibodies that cost $100,000 a year. So the government clearly says, let's get somebody to give us a deal, right? That's what they're looking for. So, but I think we have to be cognizant that the ability of governments to pay for medications is always going to be hanging over us. It's bubbling up ever more. And so it's something I keep a very close eye on. Because the other thing that we have to be aware of is many of these people with neurodegenerative diseases, unlike other diseases in the US, so I'll just go back to my psoriasis example. Most people that have psoriasis are actually commercially insured here in the United States. So they would have like United Healthcare or Aetna or something because they're able to carry out their life on their medication or whatever. People with ALS or Alzheimer's are often either on Medicare, they might be on Social Security disability. That often happens with an ALS diagnosis. You're immediately qualified for disability. So now you're part of the government payment system. So as a biotech from Australia, it means thinking differently about how you will go about justifying your price in the US, because your main customer is the patient, but your payer is going to be the US government, Medicare and Medicaid. And so those rules come into play, and how to get the right price for the product in that environment will be really, really critical. So I hope that's a decent answer to your question.
I was going to ask, all of the stuff that you just spoke to, was that something that was part of your pharmacy training, or is that marketing? Like, where have you acquired all that knowledge from? How?
Yeah, it's this experience. So absolutely, I had to learn in pharmacy school about those things, but it's gotten way more complicated since I graduated, and even since I was working in a pharmacy selling prescriptions. So throughout my career, I've had to just learn these things as I've, worked through. So I've had, 34-ish years now to kind of grow along with it as it's evolved. Now, look, there are people that specialize and do nothing but pricing and access. And we will have to work with somebody who's a real deep expert in that area. But I have enough knowledge of it and have worked with enough companies to help them with pricing and things like that, that I think I can give some good advice to companies on that front. But yeah, it was not and by the way, I'm not sure it's a formal part of anyone's schooling or training at this point. You can go and get like a master's in public health and maybe have a concentration in that. But I think until you've worked on an actual product and had to go through the process with several products and different points in time, because there's no one thing that just applies to every product, right? We can't just stamp it and say, okay, we're just going to do that. And so, yeah, so it does require being pretty wily. And by the way, the same thing applies like with pricing with the countries in Europe, the payers there, they want certain data and certain things in order to get pricing. And so access and reimbursement is a big deal everywhere. Yeah. I think it's gotten a lot harder in the US in the last 10 to 15 years than it ever used to be. And so that's been a change here. And it's become much more of a public thing because it's something because of our system here. Drugs are one of the few things patients actually see the cost of or bear the cost of, and have to pay a part of. If I go to the hospital and have an x-ray and am admitted for surgery or something, I might have a small portion of it I have to pay, but most of it I don't see until, a month and a half or 2 months later, or there's bills that come in and my insurance company's paid for everything. But prescriptions I have to pay for out of my pocket most of the time. And so that's what has driven this very public backlash, frankly, against pharma and pricing here, and where we have to do a better job as an industry of explaining and justifying why things are priced the way they are, and why that's justified based on the benefits that people are getting from these medications.
Thank you for that really detailed answer. I don't even, pretend I have an understanding on that whole area, but we're in excellent hands, obviously, with you on board, Katie. I just wanted to ask, as a way of sort of wrapping this part of the the interview up with you. Do you have anything else you wanted to share with our listeners to help them better understand your role and contributions? Any sort of summary you wanted to make?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that, as a board member, so it's very interesting being a board member because, ultimately my responsibility is to the shareholders as well as the company. And there's always a certain amount of, you have to let management's supposed to be making the decisions. But with a company this size, the board is really quite involved.
Mm.
And so the company does look to us for advice and for direct input. And I like that, right? I love to get my hands dirty with the best of them. So, it is riding that fine line of not overstepping. But when the company asks or is looking for direct input, I'm delighted to give it. So hopefully I'm bringing, a bit of perspective, as somebody who's got expertise in the U.S. market and the U.S. marketplace, but also as someone who, has worked in healthcare her whole life and has seen different products come and go and be successful or not be
Yeah,
successful. Hopefully I have, things to bring from that aspect. And then just general good business sense, I hope. I've had my own business now for, goodness gracious, it's going on almost 17 years. And so I understand, how hard it is to run a business and to be successful. And so hopefully some of that gut, lends itself even to this company.
absolutely.
Um, yeah, it's just common sense. I like to think that I'm pretty objective and common sense about things. And so hopefully that's the other thing I'm bringing to the table.
Thank you so much for going through all our questions today. I just wanted to now just switch the focus a little bit. Just I don't think I'll get this opportunity to ask these questions again, so I'm just going to make the most of this chance. Well, I've got it, Katie. Okay, so I have a little bit thing for food. So a couple of these are going to be related to food. So very important
Okay.
one. Okay, preference, sweet or savory? Discuss.
Oh, sweet, sweet.
Okay, what in particular, like cake, pie, ice cream? Like, what's your
Oh, I'm
thing?
definitely cookies, ice cream and cookies first. I'm
Okay,
more, I'm
what
definitely
kind
a
of
cake, not
cookies?
pie. Oh,
Okay,
cookie.
like chocolate chip cookies, vanilla ice cream. What are we going with?
I'd have to say mint chocolate chip ice cream. That's always
Oh,
top of my
mince. Oh,
list.
that's divisive. Sorry.
Oh, I love the mint chocolate chip. That and then like I love shortbread cookies. And so I
Oh
will give away.
yes,
You can probably
yes.
tell from my last name that I'm of Scottish origin. And my lovely, lovely grandmother, who was from the north of England, taught me how to
Yep.
make her special shortbread years and years ago. And I love to make shortbread cookies. So I
Oh.
do think ours is mine are the best, but
You
and
need my
every grandmother.
address and you need to send me some cookies in the mail. It sounds like
Yeah.
I love shortbread. I
Oh, it's
didn't think,
delicious.
um, all my trips to the US, I've really struggled to find good shortbread. That's interesting that it's a thing I've
The,
not seen there.
the shortbread here is gross. It's not
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, Walker's is the best here. That's the only one I go to. I think you
Okay.
guys have it as well.
Yes,
I don't
we
know if
do
it's
have
like
Walkers.
original, but it
Yeah,
does the
it's pretty
trick.
close. I would say I'm going to send you some. I feel like my shortbread's even better than Walkers.
Okay. No, I look forward to that. Shortbread's one of my passions as well.
Oh,
Okay.
there you go.
Now, okay, I'm going to completely mispronounce this, but I did a little bit of digging. Let's try this. What's a Hoosier? Hoosiers. Hoosiers?
Oh,
The
a
Indiana
Hoosier.
Hoosier. Okay, they
A
totally
Hoosier.
got that wrong.
That is, I got to tell you, that is a long held controversy. Technically, it refers to anyone who's from the state of Indiana.
Hmm.
So it's called the Hoosier State. It's where I
Hoosiers.
went to
Okay.
college. And I have heard all sorts of ideas of where it started. But the one that seems to stick the most is that people, it was sort of an expression people say, who's your, like,
Oh,
who's your dad? Or, who's your, it was like a
oh,
response to questions and that kind of stuck. Because
okay.
people in Indiana do tend to have a bit of an accent. So
All right. I don't think I've met anyone yet from Indiana. So where's your hometown? Where's your accent?
So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. So I
Okay.
definitely have that little Midwestern
Yeah,
twang
yeah.
with the
Yep.
A's and yeah, yeah. So yeah, right on
Mhm.
the lake.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great town. It's a
Okay.
very it's part of the Rust Belt, we call it in the United States. It was a very industrial town in the
Yeah.
in the early part of the 1900s, and fell on pretty tough times in the 60s and 70s when I was a kid, but it's had a great resurgence. Cleveland's a wonderful place to go, and it's probably it's home of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so it's a fun place to
I
visit.
didn't even know that. So let's
Yeah,
switch the focus to Australia. Have you, I'm assuming you've watched Crocodile Dundee.
only a couple times. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And you've been out here, haven't you? To
No,
Australia?
I'm coming for my first trip.
Oh,
I've not been
I didn't
because
realize that. Okay.
when I joined the main board, it was
Okay.
still COVID and everything was virtual. And since so much of the main business has really been transferred to the US, frankly, we haven't had a
Okay.
board meeting in Australia. The Australians have come to the US, but we've got most of our board members are US now. So, no, I'm very excited to come for the AGM and the board meeting. And
Okay.
I'm going to extend my stay a bit
I think
and do
so.
a bit of
I think so.
touring around. Yeah.
Have you looked up much on Australian fauna and wildlife and the things that can bite you and tickle you and
Yes,
do nasty
I'm,
things to you?
yes, I have a big list of things I want to see. I want to see the fairy penguins in Tasmania and the wombats, and we'll go for a
Yep.
whale watch and the Tasmanian devils. I definitely want to see all that. I'm definitely aware the scorpions are terrible
Yeah.
and the snakes, and not to get close to a wallaby.
Okay. Oh, really? I've
I've
heard
heard the
my
wallabies will just tear you up.
oh the koala I almost said koalas, the kangaroos, like the
The
big
kangaroos,
the
yes, yes,
yeah, the
yes.
red,
Oh
I
no,
think
I
they're
would
the
love to
English.
have hold a
Yeah.
koala. That'd be fun.
Except they've got nasty claws as well, as far as I know. I
Oh,
haven't
do
held one.
they? Yeah,
Um,
they're
okay,
awfully
an
cute.
American question. Do you have a favorite place for barbecue? I love barbecue.
Oh, barbecue is so controversial. So
Yes.
I'm probably a Kansas City barbecue person.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so there's Southern barbecue, there's like South Carolina barbecue, there's
Yeah.
Memphis barbecue, Kansas City. I'm probably more Kansas City barbecue, but
Okay. Okay.
it's all good. It's all delicious.
Yes, yes. I've tried Austin. I've tried Dallas. I was also
Oh
in
yeah.
South Carolina, but
The
Austin, the
Texas
barbecue was
barbecue, very good.
yes,
Texas, like all meat is pretty good
yeah.
in
It's
Texas.
not good for
Not a great place
vegetarians
to
there.
not a great place to be a vegetarian.
No, no. So you haven't tried Vegemite then yet, have you? I assume, like the
I
Aussie.
actually have. So I have to tell you,
Oh,
one of our best friends in the world, his name is Paul, um, is Australian, and he lived here in the States, and he had Vegemite and made me try it, and I have to say it's an acquired taste.
I didn't. Yeah, I don't have it. Yeah, no, I
Well,
hear you on that one. I think I've taken up more than enough of your time, Katie. It has been such a pleasure and privilege. You made a comment recently that you were worried about coming across as boring. I've been captivated speaking with you. I feel like I have learned so much in our time together, and I'm so excited to get to work with you. So this has been
thank you so much.
awesome.
I am very excited by everything going on. Every time you give us the update on what's happening in the science, it's more exciting, and I have to go do more reading and make sure I'm keeping up to speed on everything. So it's really exciting, and what a privilege to be associated with this company. I couldn't be happier.
But thank you so much. And until next time, thanks for your time, Katie. This has been great.
All right. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.